So hello everybody. My name is Sho Kaneko. So in the conference, I introduced myself as the CEO of this company called Repoch, but it's more like a paper company, honestly. I'm an indie hacker. I'm an open source developer who love like doing open source code on Rust on GitHub. And today I'll be sharing with you guys on the thing that I've built with this cross exchange trading library. And yeah, I've leveraged Open API and Async API documents and like use some of the toolings around it to build this trading library. And I wanted to go through that and really like just to give you guys an overview of from a developer's perspective what Open API is and really like how does it help in your perhaps your future like product pipelines. Yeah. So a bit of intro of myself. I started out as an embedded Rust developer. I used to do a lot of embedded projects, and I was also running a little hardware product prototyping company in Hong Kong. But since like last year, I started also doing open source in GitHub, and I was posting this cyclic arbitrage code on GitHub, and I've had like around 100 people approaching me no, give me the stars, and like I'm also building this a bit of like a community of people who are really like passionate about like trading in Rust. And also like through GitHub, I've had a lot of like new opportunities that opened up. So some companies that would approach me for crypto trading jobs or like crypto related backend jobs. And like since then, I've started like taking up these jobs, and then I've become a digital nomad. And right now, I spend around 80% of the time on doing my work, and 20% of my time really like doing like this open source Rust trading and some toolings around it. Yeah, and on the picture you can see like I was in Bali for 1 month for last year, for last month, and I'm in a really fortunate position to do that. But it's really like one of my targets to do a sharing here is really to to promote open source and yeah to transition into a more flexible lifestyle perhaps like if possible. Yeah. So I want to start off with talking about usually like how trading companies work, and really like I would say 100% of the time, these trading companies in crypto, um, they work in this diagram. Like the data flow is like this diagram. That is, you get the data from the exchange in form of API, which is either REST, WebSocket, or Fix, and then you do some processing of the data. You make it into event driven signals on top of signals, and you build strategies, and yeah, you have visualization, you have backtesting, and you have ledgers and whatever. But at the end of the day, again, you talk with the exchanges, you place order, you look gather your ledger. So it's quite interesting how like the central part, the processing part, like it's like input output and input processing and output, right? And the processing part is obviously the core of the business, right? The trading companies. But I've realized how even my previous company or the partners that I talked with, really like just the crypto trading community or like the group of people that I've talked with, they would spend quite huge time. So around 20% for the good ones, and really some of them struggle to spend like 50% of the time dealing with this API integration. And that's mostly because these APIs are not well maintained, they're not really accurate and not properly versioned. They don't really align with the actual API, the production API, because these exchanges are like fast moving. Also, like you have to do a lot of like unit testing, and also just because like a lot of like these trading companies, they would trade on different exchanges, so they need to figure it out a way to to do a cross exchange trading, but they don't like quite a lot of them struggle in that doing that. And you may argue, right, there are actually other trading libraries or framework that you can work with, and most notable one I arguably is the CCXT, which has bindings to 100 exchanges, right? That's awesome. But they also have a problem, right? First, it's written in JavaScript. Second, it runs in this client and server mode, and basically you're running a server on your client, on your PC or your server, but then like you're doing the query through this server, so you're not really capable of doing HFT in some context, right? So these frameworks are rather opinionated. They don't really fit into the actual needs of trading companies. And also like you are building a Rust wrapper. Let's just say like I'm a Rust developer. I'm building this. I'm building a Rust wrapper on top of JavaScript and Python, which is a mess. And generally, it's not a good idea. And you may say, okay, there are other good ones. Barter, I think it's a really nice one. Open Limits has a really good way of structuring things, in my opinion. But they also miss out, like although they're built on top of Rust, but they also miss out the huge group of people who are, be it experimenting their strategies, or like just to try something new. Because when you need a proof of concept, right, to get things done. And really like usually that's done in Python for a lot of quantitative people as well, and that's why you're missing out a lot of people who would use these trading libraries, although like it's good. So at the end of the day, what makes a good cross-exchange trading library? I was thinking about that in the last half year or so. And really, first, like I would generalize that in the 4 different pillars in as listed here. It has to be a library. It cannot be a framework. For that, it has to be unopinionated. It has to be like a more versatile. Yeah. And in my opinion, it also has to leverage some sort of code gen client. It has to be code gen from documents. And that's the part I'll be touching on this Open API and Async API later, because you want to have a consistency between the documents and the code, and that's the main reason. It has to have a good Python support and open source so that more people can use it and like to build a better product. Now, when I look at it, I told you, right, 2 years ago, actually 2 years ago, I was still working as an embedded software engineer. A lot of like context shows things that to me like it's embedded, like lower level, and this thing here sounds really familiar to one of the really like notable thing in embedded world, and that is this thing called Arduino. Now, I'm not so sure if you have ever worked with Arduino before, but if you're a hardware guy, you love dealing with electronics or LEDs, you probably have used Arduino. I've seen one before. And yes, people would think Arduino is a tiny little STEM tool, right? But in my opinion, that's not really the case. Arduino does a great thing for a great open source platform, and that is to have this layer of abstraction that on top of abstraction, you can build application, and below that, you can build a lot of support. I'll go through that one by one. So on top of Arduino, you can build software, you can connect these hardware pins, and you can configure, you can add modules, you can add sensors into that. And the very first time that I came across Arduino is when I was in high school working on this underwater ROV, basically a robot that like gets items, or like just do this underwater scanning and make a marine GIS and stuff like that. Yeah. But other than that, like that's like quite advanced, but it's also kind of like amateur. But I've actually previously built a startup on top of that, making products like this LED fidget spinner here. And also like you can also do like a more funny projects like this was for like when I was in uni, that I built this Luxo Junior robot. It's basically the robot that you see in the intro in the Pixar, that this dancing robot, right? And it doesn't have voice, but it can listen to what you say, and then it can dance, it can make different expressions using dance and colors. So it's really expressive form of like like digital artists also like using Arduino as well. But not only does Arduino have that side, but actually it can also be used not just for hobbies, but also for something production grade ready, like ready to sell stuff like watches, smart watches, or 3D printers, or this open agricultural tooling that's, and which is good to be designed in open source, because like you fit into different size and shapes and scenarios. So my point is that although like it's flexible, but it has the flexible side, and it also has this production grade like side. As far as you are doing things properly, it's not the software, the nature of the software, that has the limitation as a hobby, in my opinion. But what's interesting in the context of trading is really the abstraction I told you and something below the abstraction, because the same code on Arduino runs on different boards. So we have NRF chip here, you have Raspberry Pi microcontroller chip here, and you have ESP32 chip here. They can run the same Arduino code. And yeah, there's a reason for that. And basically, this is the main reason that, again, it's the abstraction. So when I say abstraction here, it's more behavioral stuff, like, like turning on and off the LEDs or communicating with UART, something a bit more behavior, something a bit higher level. So it doesn't have to do with what pin you're using, right? It's more of the stuff such as like interfaces and stuff. So on top of that, you can build flash drivers and different drivers, right? And then you can build applications. But really below that, what they are doing essentially is to have some low level code, obviously, but then they have their own abstraction layer to the bindings to the memory. But really, they're implementing Arduino on top of their own abstraction. So it's like layers, it comes in layers. What I've done in the last 2 or 3 months is really to move the whole Arduino code mental, like the meta structure, but in the trading context. So for the abstraction, I've built this thing called Gilder. Basically, I've defined several traits such as ordering, like play order placement, right? Like such as buy Bitcoin at 60K or something, or like you can do stuff like what's the price of Ethereum right now, like fetch that data and like check my ledger, and that's the abstraction. And right now I've already built this local order book syncing and also like some trading signals on top of that, and I'll be porting the strategies that I've used to code I used to have in my other open source project. I will port in that on top of that. And below that, I've also have a couple of exchange clients, and then they are generated by OpenAPI and AsyncAPI. I'll go on that later. So first for Gilder, as I said, one of the 4 pillars is really like Python support. I want to support like different languages. I don't want it to be just a Rust thing. So I've defined these behaviors, these trading traits, as a domain specific language that is defined in YAML, so you can do a code generation. And it wasn't really even a difficult thing to build, by the way. It's something that I could just build in 2 days using ChatGPT. So for instance, this design specific domain specific language would contain things like the function name, input, output, the description, and it would just generate the trait in Rust, or this superclass in Python. This is ongoing. It's not really complete yet, but then I've also already like kind of like built things on top of that already. So it's like it's great. It's growing right now. I'll be adding more features, and essentially, like in the end, I want to port. And in the end of this year, I will be porting the whole cyclic arbitrage code I have on different project into this, so you can run the same cyclic arbitrage code but on different exchanges without much of a code config changes. Now, getting back to exchange collection, essentially what it does is that I've gathered per exchange, I've gathered OpenAPI and AsyncAPI documentation, OpenAPI for REST, AsyncAPI for WebSocket, and arguably like fix protocol in the future. I've gathered them for Binance, Coinbase, and Hyperliquid. And I've built this pipeline, CI pipeline, to code generate this client code that generates the REST clients and WebSocket clients, right? And on top of that, I implement the Gilder abstraction. So they implement like in a vertical, like there's a vertical integration to that. But what I've realized is that there's a lot of nice tools around the ecosystems of OpenAPI and AsyncAPI, and that's one thing that I'm gonna talk about later. Now, yeah. So one of it, right? It's like so the website, the URL link here, you can click, and basically you will see this nice API documentation. And I didn't even code it, right? What I did was like I have a GitHub repo with all this documentation with different naming formats that I just followed it. And then I have a HTML and a CSS, not even CSS, just a JavaScript parser to just read them and then give it to some. So for this one, I've used Rapidoc, and there's also like Async API Studio, and they would render these API documentation. So it's like I can just do it in few lines of code and I can build this stuff. Now, obviously, the another best, another or sort of like the whole reason of me using was to use the code gen, right? The client code gen that would generate the parsers and the client API clients. Unfortunately, there is a bit of problem that I see right now, and I have to fix. So, for instance, on here you can see in the purple rectangle that although on the API, we have to define the variable as a small letter m and capital letter M, but the code gen isn't really good at it. So it generates both the small letter M and it has a build problem, it has a compilation problem. So this is not good. But what's beautiful about the whole thing, in my opinion, is that this is all open source. So you can just have a look at how the original code gen was generated, and then you can define your own format, and then you can make a parser. So for instance, the one that I showed you just now is the Open API to REST client code gen, and you generate this. But you have like other stuff like async API to coding to generating WebSocket, right? And unfortunately, like async API to WebSocket right now is not there yet, and I'll be building them with my limited Node.js skill. But then, like, it'll be really interesting. If you are interested to be part of it, you're more than welcome. But really, like, the essence of it is that I will keep it like open source, so it's ready for everybody to use it, and really, like, it'll be part of my pipeline as well. Yeah. So I think I have a bit of more time. I want to touch on this one more thing, and that is really the current pipeline that I have is more of an API first approach, whereas there's another approach called code first approach. Now, API first approach is when you read the document on your own and you code you kind of like document Open API and Async API manually. And yes, I've been working with this Fiverr freelancer, and then like she's been helping me with this aggregating all these documents, and I have this pipeline, so they're like my assets, and it's really good. But I do foresee that in the future there's a space for ChatGPT or other LLMs to do this kind of work, because I see a good match in LLM doing this type of work. But there's another type of dynamic that is actually on the server side code. You can use some of the libraries like Poem and Poem API that would auto generate these YAMLs and also these API documentation. So you don't even have to do API documentation on your own, and it's quite easy. Like I think that's a more developer friendly pipeline, and I think that would be more and more popular. Unfortunately, like this is more of a utopian way of doing things. That's why I don't rely on that. But I do see like in the future, I really hope like this can be something a bit more popular. So that is it. I hope you guys enjoyed the. I hope you guys like kind of like wasn't overwhelmed by the technical jargons. If there's anything missing, or like anything you want to develop, or like any questions really, like, or like you want to use these tools and you're curious about it, feel free to add my contacts in here. And I have this Discord Discord server that you can join, and here it's just generally like we talk about like trading and Rust. So yeah, that's it.